A randomized trial of protocol-based care for early septic shock. In a single-center study published more than a decade ago involving patients presenting to the emergency department with severe sepsis and septic shock, mortality was markedly lower among those who were treated according to a 6-hour protocol of early goal-directed therapy (EGDT).
Hello and welcome back to this Global Health YouTube channel. My name is Greg Martin. We're in the middle now of doing a series of videos on research methods and study design. The last video we looked at case control studies and cohort studies. In this video we're going to look at randomized control trials. And we're going to take a look at the idea of confounding and talk about why it is that randomized control trials are so good at controlling for confounding. The starting point is we take a group of people who have now volunteered. These are trial participants. They've said, yes, we will participate in your trial. And we randomly assign them to two groups. Now, it's important that they're randomly assigned to the two groups because what we want is we want these groups to be similar in every possible way. The one group gets an intervention. That intervention might be a drug. It might be, there's a number of things can it be. Keep in mind that randomized control trials don't have to have people, individuals, as the subject of interest. It could be communities. It could be a hospital. But for the purpose of this talk, let's imagine that these are people we're talking about, right? So the one group of people get an intervention. They get a drug that we're trying to test. The other group get a placebo or a non-intervention, right? But we give them a placebo. And then we follow these two groups up and we analyze the data. We compare the data and we see if there's any difference between the two groups over time. One of the problems that they solve is the problem of confounding variables. And let me just try and explain what a confounding variable is. A confounding variable really is an alternative explanation for a relationship that we've observed. So let's imagine, for example, that we've noticed that with an increase in shark attacks, we see a corresponding increase in the sale of ice cream. We must assume that there's some alternative explanation for this relationship. And the alternative explanation really is what we call a confounding.
Applications in medicine. Methods. In 31 emergency departments in United States, we randomly assigned patients with septic shock to one of three groups for 6 hours of resuscitation. Protocol-based EGDT. Protocol-based standard therapy that did not require the placement of a central venous catheter, administration of inotropes, or blood transfusions, or usual care. Conclusions. In a multicenter trial conducted in the tertiary care setting, protocol-based resuscitation of patients in which septic shock was diagnosed in the emergency department did not improve outcome.
Variable. And in this case, it'll be hot weather, right? So as the temperature improves and it becomes summer, people will be swimming in the sea more and they're going to get bitten by sharks. At the same time, as the temperature goes up and it becomes summer, people buy ice creams more. And so we could erroneously assume that there's this causal relationship between shark attacks and eating ice cream, but that's not the case. There's an alternative explanation. The important thing about confounding variables is that they must be associated or they must be connected with the exposure and the outcome of interest, but not on the causal pathway. And that's what a confounding variable is. So the reason that randomized control trials are so good at dealing with this problem of confounding is that if you've got some sort of variable that would skew the relationship between an exposure and an outcome, but that variable is equally distributed in the two groups that you're considering. So the intervention group and the placebo group. Both groups are equally affected by that confounding variable, and so when you compare the two groups, the effect of that confounding variable is nullified. And the beauty of a randomized control trial is you don't need to know what the confounding variable is. Because the two groups are equal in every way that we can imagine, confounding variables that we haven't even been able to envision are controlled for automatically in a randomized control trial. Beautiful stuff. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was helpful. We're going to do some more videos on epidemiology and study design, so stay tuned. I think of the people who subscribe to the channel as a kind of a subset of the broader
Pros and cons. There are important limitations to our study. First, also we took many steps to ensure close adherence to the resuscitation protocols. We cannot be sure that elements critical to the success of the protocol in the study, by Roberts et al., were not lost during dissemination. Second, we enrolled patients who were recognized to be in septic shock. Our study does not address the extent to which any of these strategies offer advantage in settings where septic shock is not recognized properly.
Okay, the three different types of shock we're going to talk about is number 1, hypovolemic. Number 2 is cardiogenic. And number 3 is septic. And you will remember that we talked about the different pathophysiology of these shock syndromes. Hypovolemic starts off with a low amount of volume in the body from either bleeding or dehydration or blood loss, and that can cause a low JVP, which will cause a low cardiac output and a high systemic vascular resistance. And then what will happen is that the target organs will eventually lose oxygen and they will start to fail. Cardiogenic shock is where the heart initially starts to fail. That causes a decrease in blood pressure, decrease in cardiac output, not enough blood getting to the target tissues, lack of oxygen, and shock again. Septic shock, on the other hand, is where there is increased flow from the heart, increased cardiac output. However, there is a drop in systemic vascular resistance. There is deregulation of the blood going between vital and non-vital organs, and because of that, the vital organs lose out, and they start to go into septic shock.
This is septic shock. It is a serious condition that occurs when an infection in the body leads to a dangerous hypotension present.
Where we had the bucket, if you will, filled up with the fluid, and then we had the pipes that were leading from there to go to the heart, and all of this sort of came back together again to complete the cycle. And we said that there are different areas where we could have problems, and I think we labeled those A here, hypovolemic. If your volume is low, that's going to cause problems. The second one was B, or the heart. That was cardiogenic shock here, and if the heart pump is not working very well, that's going to cause you some big problems there as well. And then finally, the septic. Now that seemed to be a problem here in the vasculature, and indeed just about everywhere. You're going to get vasodilation more than others, and so blood may go to the non-vital and not so much
Dense.